All right, so let's go ahead and we'll get started with our continuing education. Let's go ahead and do intros.
Pete Peterson is here. Austin Quinn Davidson.
John Weddleton is here.
Yes, Pete Peterson's not here.
Felix Rivera.
That's right. Watch out.
Alex Lipka.
I'm Ross Roosevelt.
All right, so we have two things on the agenda for today.
Mr. Chair, I'm also on the line.
Oh, hey,
yes.
Chris.
Hey, Chris. So we have investments presentation, and we have a presentation from purchasing. So we are starting with investments.
I'm going to let Ross do all the talking.
She's going to get the links.
Yes, she is.
Now, I made a few minor changes on the hard copy, but I didn't get it in the electronic copy because Alex has one we looked at last night. But this is about debt and investments, and it's what Public Finance Division does. It's one division within the Finance Department. What we do in public finance is we manage the debt and investments of the municipality. Most of them. There's a couple exceptions. We don't. The treasurer manages the police and fire retirement system, the MOA trust fund, pre-funding board, and pre-funding medical trust. So that's a little separate from what we do in public finance. On page 2, we have short. That's the agenda there. We have a few things about staff, our core services, debt management, investment management, and we will look at returns on the last page. On page 3, we have Alex and myself listed here. We're the two leaders in the finance department with regard to debt and investments. The point of pages 3 and 4 is to show clearly that the financing of debt and investments in the municipality is managed by a very capable staff. Alex is a seasoned professional, of course, in investments, both outside and here in Alaska for the last 20 years. I've been with the municipality since 2004. Previously, I served at Alaska Housing Finance Corporation in a similar capacity for 14 years. And on page 4, there's 5 staff members that report to me, and they're all very capable people. They've got a lot of investment experience. They've got a broad array of experience in public finance as well as the private sector. Together, these 7 people have 187 years of experience.
Well, I was looking at your guys's. I thought 37 was pretty impressive, and then I saw 36. So you're really, that's a lot of years.
Both old.
Yeah. Yeah, that's older than Felix.
Thanks.
That's hard to do, but yeah.
The world of public finance is a little different than corporate finance. Public finance is where state and local governments have staff members that are used to financing debt and managing money in financing debt from public capital markets, and then also managing debt separately. Public finance is mainly about debt. So what we do in the core services, along with those 2 lines, is we're an internal services organization on page 5 here, and we bill for our services through we bill for our services in debt and investments, and hence that our budget isn't a direct down drop to the annual budget each year, but it actually gets paid by other divisions and departments that need to have debt raised for them and their money invested. So we provide management of new and outstanding debt. We have a portfolio of $2 billion of debt that's outstanding, and we have a investment portfolio that's nearly $1 billion in September and drops down to $400 or $500 million in the spring of each year, through based on seasonality of receipt of primarily property taxes. Yes, ma'am.
This is a kind of back to when you were talking about staff. Oh, thank you, Desiree. I was just wondering how you hire and maintain staff. Is it difficult because you can make so much more money in the private sector? Or is this such a special opportunity to manage this level of money or debt that's attractive? Or what compels someone? I mean, in your positions, it makes more sense to me because, you then are in charge of things and you get some exposure, whatever people want. But how is that?
So I would say a couple things. The salaries for the work that's being done are fairly competitive. Yes, you can make more in the private sector, but those salary ranges are rare and not a lot of it in Alaska for what you're doing, which is actually underwriting, issuing, and managing debt. And having been in the private sector as well as now the public sector, it is actually a easier path to get to actually manage and supervise funds like this through the public sector as opposed to the private sector. Those jobs are very rare and extraordinarily difficult. So I would say that Ross has been able to attract and retain very capable staff, and we are certainly thrilled with the people that are working there right now.
Awesome.
Yeah, and Alex pointed out a very key thing. There aren't a lot of opportunities like this in Alaska. Okay? And there's very few people in Alaska working in public finance that have basically the experience that I do. I started in 1983 and had some tier 1, so that's one reason why I'm still here. But there aren't a lot of opportunities.
You mean you love your job? Great. And that sounds like 36 years, so I'm wondering if you didn't say 37 just to try to one-up Alex. But
He is fractionally older.
Okay, I'll let it get back to
slightly
series.
older. But yeah, it's a good job, and it's a great opportunity to work in this and at the same time be a public servant. So.
Cool. Thank you.
So we're a sort of a profit center. So we bill for our services and we get paid for them, and then we the things that we don't manage, I mentioned earlier, is the MOA Trust Fund and the Police and Fire Retirement Fund and the Medical Pre-Funding Investment Fund. So we have recently, in the last few years, we've split off some investments from the pot of money that we have that we'll talk about soon. But we have a restricted municipal funds, and this is where we take prepaid state and federal grants and the angel fund money that we receive, started with a program to support local startups. And so that money cannot be exposed to loss, so we manage it extremely conservatively in a separate fund. Then we have the Anchorage Regional Landfill and the Asset Retirement Obligation Investment Boards, and they're investment funds managed by a board. So we split off those two dollar amounts for the Anchorage Regional Landfill. So we've got a set of money, we've set aside some money that will be used to close and take care of post-closure requirements of the landfill when we start doing that. The Asset Retirement Obligation is related to the Beluga River gas field, which is owned in part largely by ML&P, and that has a it's called I forget the buzzword for it, but you have to take down the equipment and make it go back to close to nature, maybe not exactly the way nature was, but I use the example of if you have a rig standing up, you probably have to take the rig down, but then maybe the cement pad just stays there. So there's that kind of stuff that's EPA and DEC stuff that's regulated by the feds and the state. And so there's an investment fund that we've set up for that. All the capital financing needs of the municipality are managed by public finance under the CFO, guidance of the CFO. Public finance manages the municipality's debt portfolio and voter authorized but not yet issued debt. So general obligation debt is what the voters vote on each April when we present them with a bond ballot proposition. And there might be a half a dozen or more each April. The school district has a separate ballot proposition, usually one or two, and the municipality has anywhere from 2 to 5 or 6 of them. Now, the reason that there's more than one, the school district is just for schools, although it's a general obligation of the municipality. The other ones come there might be a half a dozen or so, but they're based on service areas. So the taxes are, so the service areas are taxed for those particular debt issues, like Anchorage Roads and Service Drainage Area, ARTSA. That's most of Anchorage, but not all of Anchorage. So it's not called area-wide. And then there's some propositions that might be area-wide where all the taxpayers participate in. The unique thing about that is, if it's ARTSA, the clerk, during the election and the voting, the clerk has to track the voting in the ARTSA service area as well as the area-wide service area. And it has to pass in both service areas for it to become voter authorized. So we meant with the investment portfolio, and most of it is in what we call the municipal cash pool. Generally speaking, we call it the general cash pool, the GCP, but the lion's share of the money is what we call the municipal cash pool, and that has a seasonal swing of perhaps as low as $400 or $500 million in April or May of each year, and to a seasonal high of nearly $1 billion in September. I think it was $950 million in September, this past September. Yes, John?
I'm not noting some questions as you've gone along. I mean, you don't have a lot of pages. You want to wait till the end and then go back? Or
You can ask as you go.
Sure.
Yeah.
Does that work better?
You can ask.
Is that okay?
Yeah, go for it.
So starting at the top of core services, page 5. Sorry. So what you're saying is IGCs are all over the place for you guys. So in
So
the
it's
budget.
two things. One, a lot of this is IGC out to the other departments, but the other thing is that the department itself actually charges a 9 basis point fee on the funds that it manages, and that fee goes to help support the budget of the public finance department.
Right, and with regard to IGCs, because we bill for our services, public finance doesn't IGC anybody. We only bill for it. But we get IGC, believe me, but we don't IGC out, and so we just bill for our services. So when we sell general obligation debt for the school district or for general government, we finance that fee, our fee, as part of that.
Okay. That 9 basis points is part of that.
Well,
On that, or is that
on
a
the
separate?
on the investment side, it's 9 basis points.
Okay.
That's a separate fee for investing money. That's 9 basis points. And so what we do is we calculate our earnings every month. So we take the gross earnings, and then we take 9 basis points off the top for public finance, and then we allocate the rest of the earnings to the equity owners of the cash pool.
So-
And then when we sell debt based on 9 basis points, again, for general obligation debt. And then if we sell revenue debt, like for the water utility, wastewater utility, or MLNP, we charge 13 basis points. Revenue bonds are more labor intensive. And so we really we're charging that fee, and we're getting it up front, and we have to maintain that general obligation bond issue and administer it for 20 years. And we're getting paid one time up front for it. And it actually is, these fees actually have, it's been surprising to me how these fees, I inherited some of these fees when I came here, and then we've had one increase, and we raised them from 8 basis points to 9, we raised it from 12 basis points to 13, and it actually matches our budget. Our budget is really pretty well matched. And so if we have extra money, we carry it over in our fund balance for the next year. So if there's not quite as much activity on the selling side of debt, perhaps, we may not have as much revenue. So if we were underneath our expenditures, we'd have that amount that we carried forward available to us.
Why would you have extra money, though?
Pardon
If you
me?
bill for your services, why would you have extra money?
Pardon me?
If you bill for your services, why would you ever have extra money? Because don't you just bill for what you do?
Well, we bill for what we do, but then our expenditures primarily are professional service fees for our staff, payroll basically, and so that's a fixed that's kind of a fixed expenditure for the division. And then the variable is how much money we have to invest. Okay, that's a variable, and we charge 9 basis points on the market value of that variable. And then the other variable
Got it.
is on the
Okay.
debt side. How much debt do we issue? If we don't issue any general obligation debt this particular year, then we don't have that revenue.
Got it.
Okay, and then the next year, if we miss a year for general obligation debt, which occasionally we do, we generally go to the marketplace for general obligation debt every year. But 4 years ago and maybe 8 years ago, we just missed that year just because we just didn't need the money quite yet. And then the next year we issued a little more extra because it's not even. So then we might have a little extra on the fee side.
Got it.
Yeah. So it's not excess fees. It's just the fee income is a little more, not quite as even
Yeah,
as
it's
the
not like an
retirement.
hourly rate, it's based on the
Yeah.
investment. Okay, that makes sense.
Okay, thank you.
Right. No, I think in my head, IGCs are one department billing another, so you must be mechanically a little different. But isn't that IGCs is essentially that allocating those costs is like billing,
Yes,
like
but
IT
I guess what
does
Ross
through
is saying,
IGCs.
so for example, the controllers division does all the accounting, so their entire budget is IGC'd out to everybody.
Right.
As Ross is saying, we're very specifically, charging for the services of issuing debt and managing the money.
Yeah.
So if we're not issuing any debt for you, like your Merrill Field,
Right.
we're not going to charge you any money.
So yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, okay, that's a neat distinction. So can I?
Wait, can I ask about that? So wait, isn't that how IGC works?
So
When you do something, you charge for it?
So IGCs, and Lance can speak about this more generally, but they aggregate all of the internal services costs, and it's somewhere in the $20 to $30 million total for general government. And then that gets charged out
I
to
see.
all the enterprises and everybody else that uses those services, which is different from what we're doing because public finance is only charging for its actual service to you when you needed to borrow some money, or service to you because you have $100 million in the cash pool and we're
Got it.
managing it.
Thanks, John.
Yeah, I was thinking about the landfill. So we have a fund where we're putting money into there for closure and potentially buy a new place. Is that in
It's
there?
for closure.
But just for closure.
Just for
clean it up.
closure.
So
Closure and post-closure care.
Right.
The
Oh, for
landfill-
long term,
Yeah,
so,
because
yeah.
after you close it, you have to maintain
Right.
it for
Okay, so
many years.
you made some assumptions like it'll close in he's got a clock, 33 years and 2 months and 6 hours or something. So you're based on that, but we're doing a lot of things now, put a huge amount of money into things that will lengthen that, perhaps substantially. If we did waste to energy, it would be extended 1,000 years or something.
Correct.
Do you adjust your?
So we're actually going to
Based
be
on that.
meeting next week on that exact same topic. Right now, the landfill fund is fully funded, and so we're going to be examining exactly what statute allows us to do. Should we be fully funded now, or should we? We're going to examine that stream of revenue because you're correct. If we do in fact institute waste to energy, that's going to change that number quite substantially.
When you say fully funded, we have the amount we need now to close it and maintain it, or
So
you
it's
mean
it's an
actuarially?
asset liability study, so we'll say that it's going to close in 30 years, right? So we happen to have, I think, somewhere around 32 million. In 30 years, that would be worth 90 or 100 million, because that's what we think the liability is going to be discounted back to the present.
Okay. That's important because we've raised the rates for solid waste services substantially. And if we can cut their contributions to that, maybe we can mitigate some of that.
And it's important to understand that those rate increases are doing two things. One, they're catching up, obviously, with past years where we didn't. And most of those rate increases is going to support a debt service coverage ratio because they're going to spend somewhere around $100 million to replace the transfer station. And so they need those rate increases in order to be able to borrow the money to finance that.
I'm looking long term though. This landfill thing is a long term thing. So that's 3 years from now, maybe we only raise our rates 2.5% or something.
That could be
You know,
correct.
so. And then a question on this: you say a low point on the municipal cash flow of 500 million. It seems like I've seen it recently 300 or something in some of those reports we get. Still a lot of money, but substantially less
Yeah,
than this.
and that report that you're looking, that quarterly report that we've been sending out, that's the municipal cash pool,
Right.
okay? And that's where the lion's share of money is. Property taxes go into the municipal cash pool. Now, there are other pots of money that I included in that bottom line there, that includes the ARL fund, the ARO fund, the RMF fund. It includes money that's at Key Bank for liquidity purposes, that sort of thing. So it's not, the municipal cash pool is not all inclusive. The general cash pool is all inclusive.
Okay, can I have one more of this? So we do May, June or something like that, we do tax anticipation notes, right? And because the property taxes haven't come in yet, but we need that money to keep the city going. But isn't that what the municipal cash pool is? Why don't we just pull money out of that?
So
instead?
the point of that is if you remember that 12 years ago, we did a study on the municipal cash pool, and we realized that there was some money that we actually never touch. So we segregated that money into 3 pots: middle to long term, midterm, and very short term. And all the tax revenue goes in and out of the short term fund, which can vary from 50 million to 500 million when taxes come in and out. We do the tax anticipation notes, and we generally do those in January and February for one very simple reason. So we do not have to sell anything out of the cash pool, which would both incur transaction costs and would as well decrease our ability to earn a higher rate of return by having this money in long-term money. So we borrow it for a year at very low rates. And as an example, it's anticipated that the tax anticipation note that we did this year was beneficial to the tune of about $1.6 million of additional income that we would have not otherwise received if we had actually drawn down the cash pool.
But so we have it broken into 3, and one is short term. I mean,
Right.
you got that treasuries or something paying
Yes.
0.
Well, it's actually over 1% now.
Is that right? OB. So, and we want to draw from the other 2, but that is somewhat available for immediate needs. And is that not is that
So
too little?
if without the tax anticipation notes, that fund would go to 0 or below 0.
Okay, because that's so thin.
Well,
that
it's
not enough.
it's designed. The cash flow is designed to maximize income. So we are going to run it so that the amount that has the least amount of yield has the least amount of money in it without jeopardizing our ability
Okay.
to.
So you worked in the TAMs will be an annual thing, just for the broad. So we really should look at municipal cash pool earnings, TAMs,
Correct.
as a group. Okay.
Yes.
And as Alex pointed out, that the short-term money, the working capital portfolio, that would be depleted, and we would have to go into the contingency portfolio, the next one up, pull money out that's invested long. So it sounds like you're spending money when you issue tax anticipation notes, because you are, but remember, it's short-term money, 9 to 12 months of a debt instrument, and we compare that to the long-term investments that we have in the other 2 portfolios that are longer term, and a lot of times we're making money, as Alex pointed out.
Well, that's good. Thank you.
So it's a good thing.
All right, I have a couple other questions. Pete?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I wanted to go back to the landfill a little bit. You said we have $32 million in that account right now. We're talking about building a new transfer station and going to generate electricity possibly. So would we be able to borrow from that fund since we're going to extend the life of the landfill another 100 years or 50 years or whatever it is?
We're going to explore that conversation next week to understand, A, what does the statute allow us to do, and B, when things do change. So if we implement a new transfer station which has higher rates of recyclability, lower rates of use of the landfill, and obviously if we go for waste to energy, which would substantially extend the life of the landfill, that will also enter into the calculation of, if we are well overfunded, we would definitely explore how we could possibly use that money currently, as John said, to maybe not have to raise rates as high as we might otherwise need, if in fact the liability gets reduced substantially.
And one other question on a different subject now. Robin Ward's real estate department, do they manage their own funds, or is that your department handle that as well?
The money and the investments, that's all in public finance.
It's all public finance?
Yes, yep. And it's, obviously it's the accountants account for it, and we're, it's fund-based accounting. So the real estate services has, if they have $1 million in their fund, we track that, they get earnings on it, et cetera. Same with the school district. The CFO is responsible for all funds in the municipality, including the school district. So the school district has a large portion of the municipal cash flow that we talk about. So they own actually about 25% of it. General government owns about 75% of it, and then ACDA owns about a little less than 1% of it, so they have their money in it as well. Now, each of them, the school district and the general government, we both bank at Key Bank, so there's funds on deposit there for liquidity purposes and maybe some other things. If they have a checking account for this or that, they might keep some separate funds separate. And so when I'm talking about these giant numbers, I'm talking about everything all together on the investment side and on the debt side, and then we'll get into a little more detail here in the next page or two.
Thank you.
Yeah, one more, Suzanne.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Apologies for being late. This is just a general reference question. And we get a lot of reports, and I know there's a lot of information online about the city's finances as well. Is there, what's the best reference document in terms of what funding is available to the city? And I'm thinking of our conversation, Alex, recently about unrestricted fund balance and restricted fund balance and how those, pieces move, as well as when we borrow money from ourselves, like what we did with the stormwater utility. Is there, where can I go to see like all those different options?
I think the best way to understand it is through the budgeting process which we're in right now, because the budget describes how much we can spend, and really it's the function of the public finance department to follow through on those instructions. And so it's clearly delineated. Obviously, if the public votes for debt, we issue the debt. If there's cash sitting on the balance sheet, we manage it. Items about, whether it's AWU or ML&P, and they need additional money to borrow money to manage their budget, we support them in that manner. The idea behind the unrestricted fund balance is really that calculation, which is done once a year together with the budgeting process, kind of describes what's available to be spent, which is why the budget discussions are so important, because I think as Lance has detailed it, we're going to run through the end of this year most likely underneath our fund balance policy of having 12% unrestricted. And the rating agencies look at that very closely to see, well, are you in permanent financial difficulties, or were these just one-time things for the Henry settlement, which we'll be able to tax for, whether this is temporary underfunding due to earthquake reimbursement from FEMA. Those are the two things. The bigger thing which may concern them more is the fire department budget. Is that a permanent thing, and what are we going to do across the entire municipality to balance our budget in order to accommodate those expenses? So I would say if you look at the budget process and very specifically look at I think you get the information from OMB on how we calculate the tax cap. I mean, that's, I think, the best way to understand, what monies are available. But the reality is that, there are things we can do if we need to. For example, for stormwater, it's something that we wanted to get funded. There was no other source of funding except to go borrow the money. Those are, I would say, individual items, and they're generally very small in the scheme of things. We're borrowing $1.5 million on a budget of $1 billion with $2 billion in debt. But that kind of describes the scale of what's possible. be a waste-to-energy project. You know, what you're next going to see is a model. And is that model going to be able to support the roughly $350 million cost? And so that's like everything. We start with, if there's revenue to help support debt, then we can finance it. These are the discussions we're having relative to the port. How much do we have to raise their revenue in order to support debt needed to meet capital expenditures?
Thanks, and a quick follow-up, I guess, is sometimes just in talking with members of the public, there's a little bit of confusion as to when do we bond for something, when do we put it to the voters versus when do we just borrow, and you know how the city makes the decision as to pursue one option of financing versus another.
I think that's driven by the code. I mean, we go to the voters because we're required to in order to make certain expenditures. I think it's the same way when we think about how did we finance SAP.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
Right. So
because it comes up, why didn't we have to vote on the $80 million and we vote in these smaller projects?
because what happened is the assembly at the time approved the budget, and the budget included X amount of money. How did we use that budget? So, you know, when you gave us a budget of $7 million a year for SAP, you know, what we chose to do is to borrow X in order to be able to spend that money, as opposed to just actually spending cash.
And if I may, Mr. Chairman, you don't finance operating expenses.
Right.
You finance capital expenditures.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's part of the difference here. And so, no, I'm sorry, the other thing I wanted to say is we go to the voters for general obligation debt. They have to pass that, because what that means is we're pledging the municipality's ability to tax for it. Okay, so they have to vote on that. Now, for revenue bonds, which is like for municipal light and power, water utility, wastewater utility, stormwater utility, any of these utilities, that's revenue debt. So we don't have to go to the voters for revenue debt, because that's not based on taxes. That's based on a stream of revenue from the users of those respective utilities. That's the difference between revenue debt and general obligation debt. So you want to go to page 6, that would be good.
I'm sorry, I want to delve into that a bit. So we have denying a center 12% for bed tax. 4% goes to Denina. Is that counted as a revenue tax?
That is a revenue tax.
That's a revenue tax. That did not have to go to vote. Did part of that go? Or the 4% increased in it?
Originally, it did.
Yeah, I don't.
I went, would you repeat the question, please?
Thinking about the Denina Center and the 12% bed tax of 4% is committed to the Denina.
Yes.
So, and I'm just saying, is that a revenue tax?
That's a revenue.
That is
that's
a revenue tax, and that didn't go to the voters. I mean, we did go to the
that
voters.
went to the voters.
Why?
It's a tax. Anytime you tax the municipality,
tax.
we are required to go to the voters. So if we wanted to increase that tax from 12 to 14%, get an extra 2% of revenue, which would be unrestricted revenue, we'd have to go to the voters. So the tax was 8% up until January 1st of 2006. And in 2005, I think, we went to the voters and they said, we'd like to build a convention center, bring more people into town, help grow things, and we'll pay for it with a bed tax. So it went from 8% to 12%. At the time, the national average was 14% for bed tax across the country. So we were kind of underneath it, still by going up to 12. And that 4% is dedicated solely for what we call the convention centers, which is both the Egan and the Denina.
Right. So
So it's a revenue.
it is a revenue tax as opposed to tariffs at the port or trash fees at solid waste services. So solid waste services can do a bond based on their revenues, and that doesn't go to the voters.
Correct.
But this is a revenue tax.
This is, because it was specifically funded by a tax as opposed to by operating revenues.
And it became part of a revenue bond transaction, as I described earlier, because the bonds we sold to build the Denina Center, like almost $100 million, they're supported only by the revenue stream of that particular tax. So there's a little crossover in that particular bond issue, where the revenue stream is a tax, whereas ML&P, the ratepayers pay rates. And that's revenue, and that's hence the revenue bond.
Debt management.
Debt management on page 6, so we can talk a little bit more specifically about debt management. As I mentioned, in aggregate, the municipality has nearly $2 billion in debt outstanding, approximately. About $1.6 billion is general obligation debt. And so if you add up all the other stuff, the revenue bond debt, and some of the master lease program and the short-term borrowing programs that we have here and there, you get up to about over $2 billion. Right now, the municipality has $219 million of authorized debt that has not yet been issued, authorized by the voters, going back 3-4 years, 1-2-3 years, something like that. So once the voters authorize that debt, we don't immediately sell the debt. We only sell it when we need to sell it. And there's a split there. General purpose has $106 million, schools has $113 million of authorized but not yet issued debt. So we could issue $219 million of debt now because the voters have asked us to do that. We always take it to the assembly for approval when we do that.
Got a question for you, Meg?
Thank you. Does that debt have a sunset at any point if we don't use it by a certain time? Do we?
It does not sunset.
Never, ever.
It does not sunset because the voters told us to issue it.
Or that you could issue.
Correct.
Permissive.
Yes. Permission to issue.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Do we know what
That's correct.
our oldest, or how our oldest amount of debt in there is, or when the
We do.
last
I don't
unissued? Okay.
I don't have it by memory, but we actually have a nice little grid and a chart. Every bond ballot proposition, we track it. So if ARTSA this past April, if ARTSA was like $35 million bond proposition that passed, we'll issue that $35 million. We may take 2, 3, 4 years to issue that.
I'd love to see that chart, especially as
And
we're
we
talking
certainly
about
can.
new potential bonds.
Yep, it's an
Okay,
important
great.
chart.
Thank you.
And I asked this question too, because the question is, when you see unissued debt outstanding, can we just like skip a year and not issue any debt at all, or not ask for any debt issuance? And the way these projects work, because they're capital projects, they need to be designed, that in some years, you're going to be spending money on design, next year you're going to be spending some money on initial construction, and so it doesn't always get spread out over time. I believe, the last time I looked at it, the oldest outstanding but unissued was somewhere about 2013 or 2014.
Great. Thank you.
And the school district has a list online of their capital projects and funding sources and debt year, because that had come up, how much do they have that wasn't triggered, and I know that it's available for the public on their site.
Okay, back on page 6. In 2005, we brought on a company called Hilltop Securities, formerly First Southwest Company, and what we did was we reevaluated everything that we do with regard to debt issuance and debt management. And we do this routinely with our financial advisor to make sure that we are seeing best practices when it comes to debt issuance for the municipality. Financial advisors, a New York-based firm, they responded competitively to an RFP over the past many years. They've been successful more than once in that RFP process, and they've been of great help to us in a lot of capacities, not just debt issuance, but also with expert testimony for RCA rate case hearings for electric utilities, both AWW and ML&P. So they bring a lot of value and expertise to us. They see what's going on across the globe and the country and what other clients of theirs are doing, and that's also helpful. One of the things that we have done starting back in 2008 was we started a short-term borrowing programs. In 2008, we started a commercial paper program for the Port of Alaska. At that time was the Port of Anchorage. And it's a short-term borrowing program. It's a commercial paper program. You've heard about that. We can issue tax-exempt commercial paper. We've also got short-term borrowing programs with commercial banks. And what it is primarily a good thing for is to finance the beginning process of capital projects, where you borrow for 3 or 4 years, and you get up to a critical amount, and then you refund that short-term borrowing debt with long-term revenue bonds. That's typically what we use it for. And the $40 million that's outstanding for the port, it only has one debt outstanding. It's a short-term borrowing program. It's a direct loan agreement, a direct placement with a commercial bank that was competitively sought out as well. And that's $40 million, and that's been in a short-term mode since 2008. And basically, if that was in long-term revenue bonds, the difference between long-term revenue bonds and the short-term borrowing program is like a $1.2 million savings every year for the port because of the short-term nature of the debt. Now, they're not paying down any principal, they're just paying interest, but the difference in the interest is about $1.2 million. Now, you can supersize that with ML&P. They have $192 million outstanding in short-term debt. Now, were it not for the anticipated sale of ML&P, we would already have refunded that into long-term revenue bonds, but because of the sale, we're leaving the debt status of ML&P just as it is until we consummate a sale. So that's the nature of the short-term borrowing programs.
I would add, and
Please.
what you saw relative to the proposals for the port, what you're going to see coming forward from the Port Commission, is that after 12 years of having that, not paying any principal down, we are going to start paying principal down on that $40 million note. So that is starting to contribute to, the increases that are going to be needed in port tariffs. Is that we're no longer just going to let them float $40 million forever. We're going to start paying it off.
Fred?
Yeah, and thank you. I apologize slightly for being late. Very well testified.
Rather than totally.
Pardon? Yeah, it's open. Back a few decades when I worked in the oil industry, their managers would call every department head on Friday and say, where are you at on your committed funds? And they would be investing that over the weekend and make significant amounts of money. But am I right in assuming that our short-term investment isn't that short?
Well, we're on the debt page right now.
Yeah, no,
But you're talking about investments, which
Yes.
is perfectly fine.
Yeah, forgive me for being out of order.
No, that's
Go ahead.
But on the investment side,
Yes.
yeah, we have, if we want to skip ahead to the next page.
Well, no, go ahead, or you can wait. Pardon me for being out of order.
No, that's.
Let's go ahead because we're running out of time.
I'll cap off page 6. We have what we call an intermediate term borrowing program. Intermediate term or medium term is like 5, 10, 12 years. And so we set up a program for the water utility and wastewater utility. They wanted to amortize some of their debt a little faster than 30 years. So we said, well, let's set you up for a 10-year program. And they borrowed $10 million and they amortized it over 10 years. And the other utility borrowed $20 million and we're going to amortize that over 10 years. So it was a little unique to do that, but it was good because they wanted to amortize some of their debt a little faster. And we also kept the program in a variable rate mode that now after 1 year we can convert it to a fixed rate if we wanted to. If rates were to do something dramatic, we could convert it to a fixed rate of income or fixed rate of debt, but we've left it there, and it's again that $10 million and $20 million being invested or being borrowed short term is a money saver for those two utilities.
So the short term, like 10 years, I mean, because we'll borrow to buy trucks and stuff like that. I mean, we're not going to do that for 30 years. I mean, aren't you required to do that for 7 to 10? If you're buying vehicles?
We do, for fire truck, for Anchorage Fire Department, they go to the voters periodically for big rigs, fire trucks and trailers and stuff like that. And what we do when we sell the debt, when we come, and they get, let's say they get approved for $5 million and that buys them 3 long ladder trucks perhaps. Okay, the useful life of those trucks are probably not 20 years. So, but what we do when we sell the bonds is we make sure that we have a certain amount of debt amortized in the early years to cover any asset that we're financing in that giant bond issue or that large bond issue for 20 years. We make sure that we're amortizing enough to cover the shorter term assets.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Okay. So we go to page 7, and we've got a few minutes left here. And so the general cash pool is a sum of all of the municipalities' investments. And most of it is in the municipal cash pool. The municipal cash pool is comprised of 3 investment portfolios. One is a long, and they're based on duration. One is a longer duration portfolio, one is a shorter duration portfolio, and one is a working capital portfolio. Very short-term investments. So that's where we go with our money, in and out daily, or 3-4 times a week we go in and out of that. If we have revenue that came in, and we put it in the working capital portfolio. If we have to make payroll on every other Friday, generally we're taking money out of it. Okay, and then periodically we balance those 3 funds. Okay, those 3 funds are set up with investment criteria for each respective fund, and they each have a separate external money manager. BlackRock manages one portfolio, PNC manages a second portfolio, and a local firm here, Last Permanent Capital Management Corporation, manages our working capital portfolio. So it's nice to have those guys handy locally because they can come over and talk to us anytime, and it works out very well. We've got great relationships with all 3 of these, but the public finance staff doesn't have to worry about the individual investments, which is what I think your question was earlier, Fred.
And or the individual cash value, since all the cash is in one pool, they're doing exactly what.
Yeah, and I guess the potential conflict in BlackRock also does something like.
I don't think that's a conflict.
And can you give us a rough number of what you make off of
We're
those?
getting there. Yep, we're getting there.
It varies year by year.
Okay. So the Investment Advisory Commission, which is the commission that helps manage the MOA Trust Fund, is a partner to public finance under code, and we seek their input on a lot of things that we do. And we also have an independent investment advisor called Callan. It used to be Callan Associates. I think it's called Callan LLC right now. We use them and have them as a partner in our investment aura, so that we continue to practice best practices for money management. So if we go to page.
Wait a minute.
Okay.
Bullet 3,
Yes, sir.
the last line.
So that describes when Jeff Sims was CFO 12 years ago. We went to the structure that Ross just described, where we realized that we were not always getting all the money, and so we invested it in 3 separate areas: longer term, medium term, and short term. And as we were describing earlier, the reason why we do a tax anticipation note every year is so we don't have to buy and sell in those medium-term and long-term portfolios. And as this describes, that over the last 12 years, it's added over $70 million of additional income into the municipality, which is offset.
Okay, I had enough time to figure out over what period of time.
12 years.
Yeah, I thought that you were doing that annually.
No.
I was really impressed. I'm very glad that the mayor hired you guys.
So in 2004, when I came to the municipality, the longest investment was 90 days. Okay. So Jeff said, Ross, let's take a look at this, and we hired RV Coons and Associates to come in and evaluate what should we be doing with our money. Here's the history of how much we've got going back. Here's how we spend it, and they said, why don't you set this municipal cash pool? And we set it up. We brought the code up to date. Code dated back to unification, back to the 1970s. We brought the code up to date. We started this municipal cash pool, and we implemented it in 2007, just in time for the Great Recession. And of course, a lot of money was lost in the Great Recession. But the municipal cash pool had a positive return in 2008 of 0.69%. So it was very, you can't find a portfolio that had a positive return in 2008 unless it was invested only in U.S. Treasuries. Those portfolios had great returns because everybody fled to quality. So the timing was good to change the code. We got conservative investments in place, and we did have a little market adjustment down, but by September of 2009, we had recovered everything. So it was a total success story.
Good on you.
Here we go. We're going to finish up.
So yeah, we're finishing up. If you go to the last page, page 8 says we invest our money for safety first, liquidity second, return on investment third, and we use the process of this portfolio that Alex has described with long-term, medium-term, and working capital durations. Now, just coincidentally, we came up with, we looked at the returns of the municipal cash pool. We calculate these returns, we calculate the returns, of course, periodically. The trailing one-year return as of June 30th, 2019 for BlackRock was 7.65%. For PNC it was 4.6%, and for Alaska Permanent Capital it's 2.3%. And you can see how the BlackRock manages a longer portfolio, so typically the longer duration portfolio is going to make more. And then there's a medium-term portfolio, which we call a contingency portfolio. They're not going to make quite as much because their investment criteria is to have a pool of money that we might need to rely on if we go through everything in the working capital portfolio, which is managed by Alaska Permanent Capital Management Corporation. And of course, their benchmark is the 90-day treasury. And so, in fact, in all three of these, as you can see, they've beaten their benchmark for the trailing one-year return. Now, just coincidentally, we look at this all the time, of course, but I looked at the 1, the 2, the 3, and the 5-year trailing returns as of June 30th, 2019, and in each case, each of these three managers have beaten their benchmark for all of those returns. So sometimes you might see a return for a 3-month period or a 6-month period or a 1-year period in the quarterly reports that we're delivering, but it's very important to look at the longer term. When you're looking at 1 and 3 year returns, that's where you're really seeing is the manager beating their benchmark. And we pay the managers to beat their benchmark gross of fees. That's how the marketplace pays managers. Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, Fred.
What does trailing mean?
Trailing means that any, excuse me, at June 30th, the prior 12 months.
Yeah.
So that's the trailing 1 year.
We were both smart to pick BlackRock one, right?
Yes, we were. Thank you. And so the trailing 2 years is a prior 24 months.
Yeah.
And same with 3 years. Pete?
Thank you. I'm not sure exactly how to ask this question, but there's a certain segment of the public out there that thinks that government shouldn't have money in savings because all that money they think has pretty much come from taxpayers, and that we should be spending that money that we have in savings instead of taxing them. And so what would be your response to someone who asks a question like that to you?
So the answer is that when you figure out how much money do we actually have that is unrestricted, this gets to Suzanne's question about fund balance. We actually only have about $50-odd million of unrestricted money. And that money is there for the very real purpose of maintaining our AAA investment rating, so that when we go out to borrow money, so if we're AAA and we have $2 billion in debt, and we don't have that debt reserve, and so now we're BBB, we're spending an extra $20 million a year just on interest and debt service. So there are two things that are happening. A, when you're running $1 billion a year business and you only have $50 million in unrestricted cash, you're running it pretty darn efficiently. So the real answer is you know, it's like any business. We have assets because we're in the process of managing a business.
Thank you.
I might add one more thing. The billion dollar debt portfolio, or $1 billion investment portfolio, that includes the proceeds of bonds that we sell as well. So in October 1st, we closed a bond issue. A school district issued, we sold $41 million for the school district. We sold $37 million for the general government. So there's $70 million right there that's restricted for those projects that the voters voted on.
Quick question?
Yeah, Susan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So for certificates of participation, I think the last time we issued one was for ML&P, and the thinking or the argument was that we would be able to pay that off, recover that with proceeds.
Correct.
So that's, okay, correct. Do you foresee us making use of COPS again in the near future?
Yes, probably in about a month. So you authorized $7.9 million for that specific COP transaction for ML&P. We issued last year 3.1 million, 3.9 million?
3.8, I think.
3.8. We're about to exercise the second piece for the 4.1, because we will, in the course of finishing this transaction, have fully spent all that money, including roughly $2 million in attorney's fees. I mean, so the answer is yes.
Okay. And that kind of debt is just the same as any other kind of debt. It's no worse or no better if you have a greater, percentage of COPS related.
So the rating agencies look at total debt, including
Okay.
all transactions. And so they're going to look at, and so when we have conversations with them, which we do once or twice a year, we're going to describe both where we are and what our plans are. And so they understand that this money is going to be issued for this very specific purpose. And they do pay attention to it. I mean, if we were to all of a sudden go out and borrow another $1 billion worth of GEO, that might raise some questions because it's going to bring with it added expense.
Sure. Thanks.
Yeah.
The COPs offer us a little more flexibility as well. When we sell 20-year general obligation debt for 20 years, first the investor gets 10 years of call protection. Debt has to stay out there for 10 years. The 7.9 that Alex is talking about with the COPs that we will have out by the end of the year with the second transaction, I can pay that off with 30 days notice.
Oh, wow.
And before, Mr. Chairman, I have one takeaway to deliver to the clerk is the chart for authorized not yet issued. I think that's the one takeaway.
Yep. Okay. Thank you so much.
I can perceive that you guys are doing a good job.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, Ron, you're up. I don't know how you turn this on.
Thanks for defining the acronyms.
Mr. Chair, we ready?
Yes, we are.
Okay. Good morning, folks. As you know, I'm Ron Haddon, the Purchasing Director, and thank you for this opportunity to come and present a little bit more information than I did last time. I purposely tried to keep the slides very brief, and I'm going to try and not read to you the slides. I will. This is our agenda for this morning, and I purposely, like I say, wanted to not spend a lot of time going through things because I'm sure you have questions that you would prefer to
ask other than me go through a lot of various information. The first thing I wanted to do was talk about terminology. And thank you for your comment, Mr. Dyson. Because in our line of business, terminology means the world of things. So the key things I want to talk about this morning is an invitation to bid, and then the elements of that invitation to bid. And there are a lot of misconceptions about invitation to bids. A lot of people say low price wins, doesn't matter who the contractor is. Well, that's not totally true. Because before we can award a contract on an invitation to bid, we have to verify a couple of things with the contractor. One, that he is responsive. And by responsive, that's really an administrative term of did he do everything we asked him to do? Did he sign the bid? Did he submit the bid on the forms that we asked him to submit it on? Because if he doesn't do those two things, particularly if bidders don't sign their bids, they're automatically non-responsive. And you will be surprised how many bidders do not sign their bid.
Yeah. What are our time constraints?
We have until noon.
Yeah, all right, thank you. So, there are two questions. On professional services contracts, it's not just price, it's qualification and performance.
That's correct. I'll get to that when I talk about a request for proposals.
All right, so what you required to do in terms of giving a set aside for minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, if any?
There are no requirements for set-asides within the municipal code. When we have federal funds, depending upon the agency, there may be some DBE requirements that come attached to those funds that we will have to abide by.
There's no 8A equivalents?
No, sir. We do not have an 8A. We do not have a set-aside program for small businesses. We are encouraged to put our projects out so that small businesses can propose or bid on those. And if you look at the demographics of Alaska businesses, I believe it's 96.1 or it's 99.1% of Alaska businesses qualify as a small business under SBA rules.
They're qualified, but you don't have to give them a leg up.
That's correct. They do not.
Yeah. And under federal law, we cannot discriminate against workers from somewhere else.
That's correct.
But is that true on where the companies are based? There's no federal restriction on that, is there?
The federal restriction is you cannot give a local bidder's preference.
Yeah, on any basis.
On any basis. But that would only apply to us when we're using federal funds. When we're using bond funds or taxpayer funds, then I do have a local bidder's preference that I apply.
Interesting. I'm glad you have that freedom. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Suzanne?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Haddon, at some point when you go through this, and apologize again for missing the beginning, could you talk a little bit about the contract that's, or the RFP terms that are being negotiated now for the stormwater utility phase 2 piece, and how that's proceeding, or just how that fits into this process? Not
Yes.
necessarily right now, but at some point in your
Yes, ma'am, I
presentation.
will. And if I don't remember to do that, please remind me, because I would like to talk about that.
Thanks.
But back to an invitation to bid, one of the things we have to, two of the things that we have to do before we can award that contract is we have to determine, as I stated earlier, that they are responsive. Otherwise, did they sign the bid? Did they do various other administrative requirements? Did they get it to us on time, for example? And then, do they meet the specifications? And that goes to the responsibility determination. And we have to determine that they are a responsible contractor. And by that, I mean, do they have the technical, financial capabilities to perform the contract? And if we have not done business with a contractor before, even if they are the low bid, we're going to investigate with that contractor. We may ask them to present financial statements. We may ask them to give us samples of previous contracts that are equivalent to that. We will do those type of things before we actually make that responsible determination. So one of the things on an invitation to bid that we have done in the past is we have required contractors within the specification to demonstrate that they have the correct certifications. For instance, if they're installing a particular type of security cameras, we will ask them, particularly if we specify the brand of that security camera, please show us your certification that you're certified by the manufacturer to install those type of cameras. So we will do those types of things in invitation to bid. And if they meet those things, if they are the low price, then they will be the winning contract.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
Do you have all the statutory tools you need in order to do your job very well?
I believe we do so. We have, the
Thank you.
code is currently written with enough flexibility.
Thank you.
We
Thank
can
you.
do that.
Thank you.
The other term I wanted to go through was request for proposal. It's called an RFP. And very simply, the difference between that and an invitation to bid is low price doesn't necessarily win on a request for proposal. Because in an RFP, we will establish requirements for our contractors to submit different information so that we can evaluate them. And that evaluation criteria, thank you, Dean, that evaluation criteria will vary based on the RFP specifics itself.
Fred?
Yeah, sorry. How deeply do you go to look at the subcontractors that a proposer may be going to use as might be in his proposal?
In a proposal, it will generally depends on the evaluation criteria. We will, and again, it varies by solicitation. On some solicitations, we have asked them, please list your subcontractors so we can evaluate the technical expertise that you're bringing to the table. And then that evaluation criteria can be things such as, tell us who your project manager is, that may be X number of points. Tell us which projects you have used that are similar to what we're asking you to propose on. That will be evaluated. Tell us, how, example would be, have you met your timeframes on all that?
Yeah, but you do that for the subs when it's appropriate.
Yes, we do that for the subs when
Thank
it is
you.
appropriate.
Thank you.
And what will happen is, and the way the RFP process will work is we will issue the solicitation, we'll define what the contractor is supposed to tell us, and in a format so that all the proposals come back in a similar format. When we receive those proposals, the purchasing department will review the proposals to make sure they are responsive to the criteria that we established. Then we will turn those proposals over to an evaluation team that has been determined beforehand. That evaluation team ranges between 5 and 7 members, depending upon the dollar value that we anticipate. And those 7 members, or 5 members, they will submit a letter to the purchasing department for me to review and determine if those members are in fact who we really want on the evaluation team. So once we get the proposals in, we turn them over to the evaluation. The evaluation team will then evaluate, do an initial evaluation of the proposals. They will come back to the purchasing department and say, we have evaluated the proposals. Here are our scoring of those proposals. We either want to do one of things, go to oral presentations, or we want to go direct to negotiations. What the purchasing department does, once we get that evaluation, we will look at the scoring to make sure that the scoring is relatively similar for all evaluators. For instance, if I get a scoring matrix that comes in and says evaluator A evaluated proposer A, and he gave them 0 points for their technical ability, and I look at evaluator B and he gave that same firm 10 points on a 0 to 10 point scale, we're going to say, whoa, wait a minute, something's not right here, and we're going to send it back to the evaluation chairman and say, wait a minute, you've got a discrepancy in your scoring. You need to either reconcile that scoring or you need to explain to us why such a range in scoring. And a lot of evaluation teams don't like that, to be quite frankly, but that's our job. We're going to question that as to why there's such a range in scoring. And then once we have approved the scoring, we will either give the evaluation team authority to negotiate or to conduct oral interviews. Once they've completed negotiations, they will come back and say, purchasing department, we've completed negotiations. Here is our recommended contract. And then depending on the dollar value of that, if it's over $500,000, we're going to come to the assembly and ask you for approval to award that contract. Same thing on an invitation to bid. If it's over $500,000, we're going to come to you and ask for your approval to award that contract. The other terminology I'd like to just...
Can I ask questions on that? Yeah, I think it would apply on this previous page. 3, okay. One thing is that administrative requirements, so you say you've got to have certain, like I know for limited road service areas, sometimes you got to have a certain kind of grader, a certain kind of pickup truck or plow, whatever, might have equipment requirements. Who decides those, and do you evaluate those?
The department will decide what their requirements are. We're going to look at those to see if they make sense. For instance, we've had some arguments, not arguments, but discussions with some of our departments on, well, why did you specify it had to be a 1985 or newer XYZ truck? Does it really need to do 1985? Could it be a 75? Does it need to be a 2010? We're going to question those if they look unreasonable.
So I had someone call me who was frustrated with something at Solid Waste Services, and he had been doing some kind of drilling there for a number of years, and then he says all of a sudden the specs change and there's no one in Alaska who has the equipment to do what they want. And he said, well, I never was told I wasn't doing a good job. Why the change?
The change on that particular one was because we needed, Solid Waste Services needed a contractor that could drill to a certain depth, 80 or 90%, I've forgotten the exact percentage, a certain depth every time. And so they put that in the spec. And unfortunately, this particular contractor had done work for Solid Waste Services in the past, but when they looked at what they had done, he couldn't drill to that. He couldn't demonstrate that he had drilled to that particular depth on 80 or 90% of the wells. And that requirement was driven by a federal requirement, at least my understanding was, drilled to a certain depth to meet the federal requirements.
Okay, so it wasn't so much an equipment thing. He could go get the equipment. It was, you got to be able to do this task.
Right, you got to be able to drill. He has, I'm trying to think which driller it was. That name was Denali.
Okay, I think
that
so.
was talking about that. Yeah, Denali's a good driller. I dealt with him when I was on the private side. Good
So
company.
he could have bought different equipment and perhaps gotten the contract.
He had the equipment, he just couldn't demonstrate that he had drilled to X number of feet, X percentage of the time.
Okay, good, thanks.
That's sad.
I'd rather deal with Ron, I think it was Ron Pitchford at Denali. Good contractor, no issues with it. But when you can't meet the spec, you can't meet the spec. And unfortunately, that's...
And even if he had the equipment, he didn't have the history. And that's groundwater monitoring.
Yeah, I believe it was certain type of wells they had to drill for the groundwater monitoring. The other two terms I wanted to go over with you, just so when you see these terms on your assembly memorandums, you've got an appreciation for them. Within SAP, we have two terms that are confusing. We have a term called a purchase order, and then we have one that's called a contract. And a purchase order can be two types of instruments. It can actually be an ordering instrument where we just put on the PO what we're ordered, and the terms and conditions are a second page to it. We send that to the vendor. He provides the items on the PO. We pay it. The other item it can be a payment instrument. And what that is, we will attach a contract terms and conditions to that PO, and the PO establishes a mechanism where AP can make the payment. but the PO terms and conditions won't rule, it will be the contract terms and conditions.
Beck?
Thank you. Can you talk to me a little bit, and maybe we'll get into it, about sequencing? Because this is where I get really confused. We are asked to approve a contract or a purchase order or something, but we don't see that document, and oftentimes we're told they're not done. And so I'm always curious, like I don't always know where or what everything is that's being approved in terms of funds, like what it's actually going toward. I have like the big picture, but anything more specific, not necessarily. So I guess, yeah, I'm just trying to get a sense of the sequencing a bit better.
We'll address that in just a moment.
Okay.
If I may. And then the other term within SAP that you'll see will be a contract. And the way you can differentiate that between the two, if we don't spell it out either by purchase order or contract, is the number that's associated with it. A purchase order will have it begin with the 2019, 2020, the year that the purchase order was awarded, followed by 6 digits. And the 2019 is your key, that is a purchase order that is fully funded. That's what we're going to pay off on. And a contract has a 44 to begin with it. And what that does is that just establishes a mechanism of which we can write purchase orders against. And a contract is something that we have got a general idea of what we're going to buy. For instance, you'll see a lot of, when we come to you, a lot of A&E architect and engineering contracts, to where sometimes they're referred to as term contracts, where we know we're going to need architect and engineering services, but we don't know exactly which project we're going to do with that. So that will have a 4400 series against it.
Ron, something that sort of helped me is purchase orders, because I thought there were only contract level before, but purchase orders often, you're going to order a supply, a truck, or
Correct.
You don't need a contract. Professional services are almost always contracts. What Ron's talking about, it could, let's say we hire a law firm to do citywide environmental services, we use an audio. We don't know which department will need them, so it's a different, it would be a purchase order, it would have to be a contract.
And then the way that you would, on those type of contracts, you would issue a purchase order against that contract. That purchase order will then define how much is going to be paid, what the scope of services that particular firm is going to perform. That's how these two documents work together. This is what requires, these are the provisions of code that tell you when I have to come to you for approval. 720.010 is a portion that tells me I have to use ITBs unless an ITB is not appropriate. And by not appropriate, I mean there are some things that you can buy through an invitation to bid where price is primarily important. And one of the classic examples I like to use is if you're buying milk. Does it really matter whether it's Dairy Gold or whether it's Safeway's brand or Fred Meyer's brand? Milk is generally milk. Now you're going to define whether you want 2% or 1% or whole milk.
Organic.
Or organic. But you're really concerned on price.
Almond milk.
What does it cost me to buy a gallon of milk?
Right.
Whereas if you're buying architect engineering services or legal services, or the other classic example is brain surgery. If you're going to have a surgeon perform brain surgery on it, do you want to buy the low price guy? Not necessarily. You want the best qualified. And so that's the classic examples of when you would use invitation to bid or request for proposal. And again, the code requires coming to the assembly for approval at over 500,000.
Can I ask a question, Felix?
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've talked with Dee and Quincy about what sounds like it's a recurring issue with some janitorial contracts that she was going to speak with you about. Apparently, we use the ITB process for that, so we always get the low-priced janitorial provider, which then ends up doing a somewhat crappy job, and because it's a sort of race to the bottom, is that a pun?
Janitorial crappy job.
Yeah, kind of dirty, crappy job. There's sort of a race to the bottom, and then they do, crappy job, and then but you have to hire them again, and then we're in this sort of cycle. And so I've heard both that it's not effective for the muni because we're constantly dealing with these kind of crappy performers, but then also not good for workers because of the race to the bottom, they're paying their workers really low wages, and of course they're often people of color and other people who are vulnerable in our community. And so I talked with Dee about what could we do to change that, and she said, well, we actually have the option, or purchasing does, to either do ITB or to pursue requests for proposal. Am I doing the right thing? Okay. So I'm just wondering if you guys had that conversation. I know you're aware of this issue, and if it's possible to try that, the RFP for a while and see if that might help.
We have, you're correct, custodial has been a problem. We have not, put it this way, we're starting to look much harder at how we're developing the specifications. Because if we don't define correctly what we're looking for in the specifications and what qualifications the contractor has to have before they can perform that contract, then we're going to have those issues that you're talking about, and we have had those issues. I'm glad to say that we have, on one of those particular contractors, we terminated them for default because they were not performing. We have changed the specs some a little bit where we're getting I'll use the term, a different quality of contractor proposing now. It's costing us more, but we're getting better service. So we're looking hard at that, and we're trying to weigh the pros and cons of that on custodial, for example.
So can I follow up? So currently, thanks, Ron. So currently you're still doing ITB, but just increasing the standards that are considered. Okay. If you guys wouldn't mind just keeping me posted on that.
Okay.
Thanks.
Meg?
Thank you. For sealed bidding, this may be partly a question, partly a rant, and I apologize, but I have a real problem with professional services in particular not being transparent, whether it's legal services or engineering services or the like hourly rates and things. I think there's a lot of value to transparency of what things cost. Except for where maybe there's proprietary information that you wouldn't want to give up. So why or what triggers things being sealed? Because I think it just adds to a level of opaqueness as to what we're actually paying for or why it costs what it costs.
It's a very good question, and it's somewhat of a difficult answer because determining whether it's a sealed bid or whether it's an RFP is really a subjective call. And we're going to look at what are we buying, does it lend itself more to an RFP? And by the way, RFPs are transparent also. Once the award is made, anyone can come in and ask for the contract. We'll give them a copy of the contract to include the pricing schedule, what it is. Because one of the things, at least, that I pride myself in the purchasing department on is transparency. A contractor wants to come in and he wants a debrief on an RFP, ask us, and within code, we will be more than happy to provide that. If people want to see the pricing on invitation to bids, it's posted on our website. The last 10 years of pricing on an invitation to bids are on the website. It takes a while to load to get all that stuff, but it's all there. RFPs, we generally don't post the pricing on those. We will post the winning contractor, who that is. And then if someone wants to come in to look at the contract, we're going to, in general, give the contract. We may take a while because we're going to have to review it and talk to the contractor to make sure there's nothing proprietary in there before we release the whole thing. But in general, most of our contracts, we try and structure where there's not proprietary information, where we can be that transparent.
Thanks.
I don't know if that fully answers your question.
It's food for thought.
Thank you. Fred?
Do we have we had many cost overruns because of owner-initiated change orders, particularly on construction type work?
I would say most of our increases in contracts are owner requested changes. I know under one of the previous municipal managers, he tracked all of that. We have not tracked that under the current municipal manager. I'll bring that up to Bill and say, Bill, this is something you might want to start doing.
Is it a significant number?
In my opinion, no, but again, depends on the project.
So it's not 2 or 5 or 10% of the contract?
If, you're talking about in terms of dollar value?
Yeah.
Yes, some of them can be significant.
So it's a classic thing that the owner needs to really watch.
Yes, it is.
And you can have fairly unsophisticated people saying, we gotta have this. And
No, you've hit a sensitive nerve on my part, because I get concerned when I start seeing change orders, particularly when I see a number of them and their owner cost. Now, if they're changed site condition, different story, and we run into those.
yeah, so that gets, you gotta do better design at the front part, specify.
Yes, you do.
Thank you.
I got the message, I'll speak to the manager.
Chris?
Yeah, thank you. On the same topic, the ITB versus RFP, I heard recently some people raise concerns that if you add any kind of responsibility criterion to the front of an ITB, you're effectively creating it as an RFP. What are your thoughts on that, Ron?
I don't think you'd be creating an RFP, you're creating an additional requirement to make a responsibility determination, Chris. By doing that, I don't think you get into the realms of an RFP.
Right. So, okay, I agree with you that it doesn't in some way, because you're saying you have to meet a minimum standard, flip into the RFP status.
Well, and there are standards, right, for ITB, so it's just adding another
Yeah,
one.
it's adding an additional
Totally
requirement.
typical, yeah.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Dee?
Yeah, I was just going to say that for change orders too, there are certain ones that have to come to the $1 million contract, and it gets 120%, or they go 20% over. So you'll see your bigger change orders coming to these. So the smaller contract is a fairly small amount. And also to make the sealed bidding is also to ensure competitiveness, and you don't have collusive bidding, and everybody has a fair, the actual vendors have a fair playing field as well, because they do the prices ahead of time. We have a couple industries that are just notorious for that.
Excuse me, on that subject, when those come before us, are they clearly indicated that it's a change order? Is that on what we see?
Yes, it is. It'll either say change order number such and such. To
Oh, and that's what, yeah, okay. Thank you.
Yep. Pete?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so if we have a contractor we've used a time or two, and they've come back to us with change orders on several occasions, then the next time they bid, that's something you're going to take into consideration when you decide to give them that bid or not.
It can be a factor in that, but it will depend a lot on how well the department has administered the contract and how well they have documented those changes in the contract.
Those change orders are owner initiated, not the contractor.
Excuse me. Yeah. Yes, sir. We have to differentiate between whether change order is owner initiated or whether it's a change site condition.
What's owner?
Or maybe a result of.
Yes.
Well, we're the owner.
Yes, we
Kind
are
of
the
the
owner.
Muni's
Kind of a
the
strange
The
term.
Muni's the owner.
Thank you.
Initiated,
Yeah.
maybe.
Suzanne?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Actually, this might be a good time to ask more about the stormwater utility RFP, if that's okay.
Yes,
And I understand it was an RFP, it's the one for the phase 2, and there was no not to exceed amount, of course, listed because it's based on factors other than price. However, it's pretty clear, I think, given how all the discussions about appropriations, everything is public, that 1.5 million is the initial upper limit for what we might be able to spend, even though 600,000 of that is somewhat earmarked to cover the 2 FTE for AWU to support it, and I think another couple $100,000 for legal, and then a couple $100,000 for additional public outreach. So it's expected to be about $500,000. But it feels like this puts and I understand it's driven by the code and requirements, but it just feels like we're kind of in the dark, or we're at a little bit of a disadvantage when, bidders know what the resources are, and we're waiting on that negotiation. I don't know, can you comment on that piece of it?
On this specific RFP, when we put that out, with anticipated scope of work and what we thought the level of effort might be in those elements of scope of work. And what's transpired with that RFP, the proposals came in, they were evaluated, the AWU came back and said, here's our #1 ranked firm, we would like your authority to enter negotiations. I said, yes, go ahead and enter negotiations. So they start negotiations. And then as a result, those negotiations are ongoing, and they're changing based on changes that the assembly body is making to the requirements for that particular service. So what we anticipate originally as an anticipated dollar amount may have been increased because of additional requirements that are being levied on the contractor and are trying to be negotiated into the contract now. And I know they are a couple of weeks away from at least starting and finalizing the price negotiations, because through an RFP process, when we turn the RFP over to the department for negotiations, they can ask purchasing to be part of that negotiation, or they can say, no, we want to do it. And in this case, they will have said, purchasing, we want you involved in the pricing negotiations. When we get to that point, we're going to ask you to come and be involved. So we will be a lot more intimately involved in the price negotiations than in some of our other RFPs. Now, when we get a contract back, that doesn't mean we just blindly accept what the department has negotiated. I've kicked, I don't know how many RFPs back because they've come in and said, hey, we want a cost plus X percentage on this particular type of fees. And I said, no. For instance, I'm not going to pay cost plus on any travel or per diem that you have to incur. I've just said flat, no, I'm not doing that. So we do review those prices. And in this one, we will be involved much more intimately in the pricing.
Quick follow-up. And just when you mentioned requests or feedback from the assembly increasing the cost, I assume you're specifically talking about like the public outreach component?
Yeah, that's part of it, because we did not envision the amount of public outreach that was probably appropriate. Okay. We took a guess at it, or when I say we, AWU's a municipality, we took a guess at what the public involvement would be, and AWU's has told me, said, Ron, we probably blew it on public involvement. We probably needed more. So
thanks.
John?
Are we done with that?
Yeah, good.
Okay. So getting back, we have it's like a 5% local preference for, if it's federal money, we can.
If we have a local bidder's preference, and it varies by dollar value, it's up to $20,000 based on the dollar.
Well, that's the max. Okay, so we had a discussion when we did this 1% for art thing on Tuesday, and someone said, do you have a local, does that apply to 1% for art projects?
Within the 1% for art program, it's a little bit separate than mine. It's within the code, but they run that, and the 1% for art program, they can establish in their criteria whether it's only local artists that can bid, or whether they want to go national. That's based, because the way the 1% for art program works is they bring together a number of community members that want to be on that evaluation committee. And then that evaluation committee, in conjunction with the 1% for art director, determines what the criteria for responding to it's advertised in a different medium than mine, and they make that
Can I
determination.
follow up slightly? So if we do a road project financed by federal funds, then they can't, there are some are restricted then, at 1%.
Then they would not be able to establish I'll call it a local bidder's preference, because federal funds would. But again, you have to look at what are the exact terminology within that grant that the feds give us, because some grants have different requirements than others, and you really have to dig into the grant.
So the question is, you're not in that loop, it would depend on that.
Well, the
committee
only
that
reason I
chooses.
know the extent of that is I was involved with the 1% for Archibald Library, so I got to be intimately involved in the evaluation of it. And my understanding is, if an assembly member, I think if you wanted to be on that evaluation committee, you could, because it's open to the public. It's, certain positions on it are defined, but in general, then it's open to the public. And I know we've had on the committee that I was in, we had some municipal members, we had some public members.
Which one of us has
Uh,
Chris does.
It's a pretty grueling, it can be a pretty grueling process. I mean, we had, and I'm getting off topic, but I apologize, but we had, I want to say 75 proposals for the library 1% for art. So it was a unique experience. I enjoyed it. It was a lot of work.
Thank you. Dee?
So we say there's case law about that local preference being invalid. And I think probably we get away with some of it on the local level. It's not big enough to challenge. There's all sorts of factors, so that's another part of that. It's not open-ended if you want to say a municipal level. And then I forget the other point. So.
Well, so but the evaluation committee can say we want only local artists?
I don't
That's
know
what I
whether we
heard.
have that in our code because I haven't worked with that program, but again, at a certain point, that could be challenged.
Maybe next. So we've set up another working group on the heels of what we just passed with the public curators and local artists to deal with some of the transparency implementation issues and to explore the local proposition if it is or isn't allowed, or if it could simply be a factor in certain instances. So, and I am the current only member, so if anyone would like to join me, you are welcome to.
I agree with you.
Thank you.
Can I just say, Nick, we have all sorts of bills and stuff on local preference and that we should be able to roll in. So for the legal part of that.
Quincy's looped in right now because she volunteered.
She's always been our 1%.
Okay, awesome.
So she knows the whole district, but that she could draw on our end.
All right, great.
Oh, I know what I was going to say. That the Department of Law gets involved in contracts upon request of purchasing for the department. And so ones that have, indemnification issues are, so we're pulled into, and I can't remember, I think one year we reviewed either 700 or 7,000 contracts with some amazing amount, but we were called in for specific issues generally.
Generally, we will involve the Department of Law and ITD on software contracts, because the whole IT purchasing is a whole other world. And like I say, we get D and IT involved in those extensively.
Okay, go ahead.
Just since we have time, you didn't really get into this, but there's a appeal process too.
Yes, there is an appeal process called the Bidding Review Board. And the way it's very short portion of the code that basically says anybody that's an aggrieved party, I think it's not even an aggrieved party, any person adversely affected by an award of a municipal contract may appeal to either the assembly or the mayor, the bidding review board. And then what the bidding review board does is first of all, the way the process works, we encourage people to send their appeal to the purchasing office for us to look at it and determine, make an evaluation whether we should recommend convening the bidding review board or not. And then if the bidding review board is convened, they come in, they look at the entire documentation and make a determination, did the purchasing department follow the process outlined in the code? And then they come back with a recommendation to the assembly.
I think I've seen one in my time.
It's been a couple of years since we've had one.
Meg?
Thanks. This is a question for Dee. That any person aggrieved, that doesn't convey some kind of taxpayer standing, does it?
I don't think, it hasn't come up.
Hasn't come up, okay. I could see some
Oh, yeah.
individuals utilizing that, so, okay, thanks.
The code is very broad in that,
Yeah.
so, and we have not, it's always been contractors. Move on?
Yep.
Okay, the other thing I wanted to talk about was proprietary and non-competitive procurements. Sometimes they're referred to as sole source. I'm required to come to the assembly for approval for anything over $30,000 or $50,000 if it's a cooperative agreement. And by that I mean we're piggybacking on a contract that somebody else has awarded. And the code says, we say sole source, but what the code actually says is, does it reasonably limit the source to one person? And by person, it's meant person or company. So that reasonably limit gives a little bit of flexibility to the assembly and to me for those small dollar procurements. If it is going to be a sole source proprietary contract, it must be in writing. Otherwise, I require the departments to send me a memo telling me why it reasonably limits the source to one firm, and then I can either approve it or disapprove it. And I have kicked a number of them back. Or else, if it's over $30,000 or $50,000, we're going to come to the assembly. And this is on initial awards. I'm not talking about change orders. Change orders is a whole different section of the code. So then that's when you will see those procurements, those AMs come to you asking for either a sole source award or a proprietary award. And sometimes you'll see that the initial award is only $14,000 because the way the code is now written is they look at the total anticipated dollar value of the contract. So if I have a contract with options, I have to include the options even though the initial award is under $30,000. That's why you'll see in the introductory paragraph, sometimes you'll see $14,000 because that's all I'm initially awarding. And then when you read through the rest of the document, you'll see the other 2 or 3 options depending upon how many it is.
Yeah, I have a few questions. Forrest?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have 2 questions. One is broad and one is specific. To what degree does sort of continuity drive the sole source decision? That is, sometimes it seems like, well, we've been using this contractor, and it would cost us quite a lot to switch over to this other system. Let's say there's compatibility issues or what have you. But over the long term, if we did make this switch, perhaps it's a superior product. So what's the time horizon that you look at for the municipality? And to what degree, again, to restate what I said, to what degree does continuity drive the sole source decision?
Difficult. It's a great question, difficult question to ask because it's very subjective, at least in my view. I will look out generally 2 or 3 years to see, does it make sense to continue this because I can see there's a new technology on the horizon.
Yeah.
Or there's an existing technology that if we bite the bullet now, it's going to pay us. Look at those on a case-by-case basis.
You said 2 to 3 years, that is a long time horizon for some small businesses or individuals, but that's a pretty short time horizon. We look at 10, 20, 50 years in some cases, right? So, I mean, do you ever look out that far?
In the past, I have not, because most of the sole sources that have come to me have been either on IT projects or it could be on, we see a lot on fleet right now because best practices has been to standardize within a fleet.
Yeah.
So those, to me, make sense. Standardization makes sense because that's going to save money in the long run.
Well, maybe, right? I mean, it saves us money in the long run if we have made the right choice, right? So we're using Ford. If GM or Toyota or whatever it is becomes significantly superior in the next few years, then we've made the wrong choice. So, I mean, I guess there's no easy answer, but you're telling me it's basically case by case and we rely on your judgment.
That's it, and then rely on the assembly when we come to you for those approvals to question us. Question the department, question us about, does this make sense and why?
Can I ask my specific question, Mr.
Yeah.
Chair? Thank you. So we had, a couple years ago, I remember it being discussed in the assembly meeting. We haven't discussed it in a while, and that had to do with playground equipment. We made pretty significant sole source, we have in the past at least, made pretty significant sole source decisions with regard to playground equipment, which seems a little bit counterintuitive, right? I mean, it seems like there'd be a lot of playground equipment companies, and I know we've been a national leader when it comes to inclusive play, right? Is it still the case that we think there's really only one company that can provide that for us, or is it the Parks Foundation that's driving that decision? I should know that, I'm on the board, but I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on that.
My thoughts on that is, when those originally started coming through, John Rada and I had a number of different conversations about those particular equipment. And John convinced me that this is the best thing because they had done their market research, they had done their studies to determine that this met our requirements and was a playground equipment that would last.
Is that still the case, though? I mean, we were a national leader in inclusive play, but now are there other places, are there other companies that are providing that kind of product?
I have not seen any of those in probably 6 to 9 months.
Those contracts you mean?
Right, those new playground equipment. Doesn't say I won't see one tomorrow.
Okay.
But I don't recall seeing any in the past 6 to 9 months.
Okay.
The other one where we made that decision was on field turf, the particular
Right.
type of turf that was. And that was a standardization of best practices because it works. And it's all through the school district and the municipality.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So sole sources are a great topic, difficult decisions to make sometimes because they are case-by-case basis and subjective. That's why I encourage you, when you see those, look hard at them.
Austin.
Yeah, thanks, Felix. You said the cooperative purchase piggybacks on another
Yes, ma'am.
award. What do you mean?
What a cooperative purchase is maybe the school district, or I'll give you an example, Vera. The school district was the leader in contracting for Vera. And so instead of me going out and doing a recompetition, talked to the school district and said, can I piggyback on your contract? Otherwise, I don't have to go through the competitive process. You've already done that. So can I write a contract with Vera based on your terms and conditions of their school district?
For an additional contract.
Yes, for a new contract, because we have a separate, if school district has their contract with Vera, we have our contract with Vera, but we can use each other's contracts.
And then that would come to us because it's over the 50K.
Yes, ma'am. Another example is vehicles. Sourcewell, who's a national cooperative agency, they do this. They have competed. Some contracts, sometimes when we look deep into them, sometimes they haven't competed. That's why sometimes you'll see a sole source, and then down on the body it will say we're using a contract from Sourcewell because they actually went out and negotiated terms and conditions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Meg?
Thank you. So I have a couple of questions. One, you said question us when we get these, and I find there's a difference of quality amongst sole source contracts that come before us. APD ones, we usually have great justification, a lot of information. I still have a lot of heartburn around the Beans emergency shelter sole source contract. We didn't have any information. We didn't even have a justification about why it was sole source. But if the departments are charged with providing a justification, shouldn't that just come to us automatically?
When we get the determination from the department, we will attach that to the AM. When purchasing gets those, we try and look at them hard to make sure they make sense and that they justify the sole source. And as you say, some departments are better writers than others. And that's why you'll see our AM sometimes a little, and sometimes a lot different than the accompanying document, because we're going to try and add additional information to help you make that decision.
Staying on that example, that particular AM actually didn't have your involvement. I didn't see your name in the list of names because I look for those things. So why might that have been?
That particular purchase that you're talking about was originally started as a lease. and Robin Ward in the real estate department is charged with doing leases. So that started with a lease. Robin was working that, and then it morphed into a contract. And Robin and I had a long discussion about why she didn't stop and get purchasing involved at that point, and that was just, I'll say, an error that we didn't get involved until after the fact.
Okay, that helps clear up some information for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Fred?
Yeah, so thinking particularly of utilities, some of those have very high cost equipment, i.e. power generators. Some of them are really old, and at some point there's a crossover place, you know, when you go to new technology and so on and so forth. Are those departments equipped to do that kind of economic analysis within, you know, what the maintenance, past restoration of new equipment, or do they get you into it?
They get us involved with it, because if they don't, we're going to question them and try and make them do that analysis, or else say, look, if you don't have the expertise, let's contract the expertise. Let's go find it.
That's good on you. Thank you. I suspect the playground equipment, we now are trying to figure out stuff that the damn vandals can't burn down.
That's part of it, yes.
Thank you. Forrest?
I thought, were you in the queue?
No, I had to put that, it was answered. Al, thank you.
This is actually not just for sole source, but it's something I've encountered on my private sector side. Are we part of any group purchasing organizations?
Yes.
Which,
We have the ability to use the way our code is written, any cooperative agreement. So we go out and look for them.
and we do. We're part of some of the big national
Yes,
ones.
Houston, Galveston.
And what do we use? What
HGAC.
kind of things do we purchase through those?
From HGAC, we will generally purchase fire apparatus.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, great. Good.
That's how we ended up with our big, the two, I forgot what they call, the big ladder truck that's out there.
Okay, thanks.
And then we'll use cooperative agreements to buy police interceptors also. We'll try and piggyback either on a state contract if they've got what we want, or we'll try and find another one.
So
If
you
we can't
consider
find one, we'll compete it.
participation in a GPO to be a kind of cooperative purchase?
Yes.
Okay, interesting. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Fred?
Yeah, I think you and your predecessor have tried to evaluate what level of stuff on the consent agenda that should we be appropriately taking time with.
Not really me, but yes, my predecessor and others.
Yeah, and it's a very valid one.
That was-
And at some point in some venue, I'd like your counsel on that.
We have, just so you know, we have.
$47 is pretty funny.
Yeah, and I think Dee can answer that question a bit.
Well, Austin and I are working on that right now.
Good on you.
Sure.
I was just going to assure you that purchasing treats sole source, there's almost a presumption against them. And we go through the mill to get that permission. And sole source memos are rejected pretty routinely. There is a quality of writer issue for some of the departments. So that's one thing. And I just wanted to say before us is that playground thing, one of the basis of the sole source was that a bunch of community councils had met and wanted this particular vendor. And I think that was sort of the tipping thing too, and then the assembly just exploded on that whole issue. But that was sort of an interesting thing, was that the community councils had done all this work and were in favor of this particular vendor.
Thank you. Forrest?
That's interesting. I think if there was, what you just said, it really struck me, that there's a bunch that are put forward that are rejected. If there's some way for you to report that to us, not every time it's rejected, but some kind of because that's a piece of information I didn't have, but I think that would help relieve some of the heartburn over the sole source if we knew. Because what it looks like from our perspective, we only see the ones you approve. So it seems like there's a slew of sole source, and it's just like you guys just do it willy-nilly, to be honest. Maybe not completely willy-nilly, but we see a lot of sole source. So if there was some way to report to us, here are all the times we've rejected, I think that would
Give you an example, I rejected one out of economic community development 2 days ago. It was for $29,000 to buy some point of sale machines over at Denina. And I said, wait a minute, I need better justification before I can approve this. And those that are at the cusp of where It should come to the assembly, or it may not.
Yeah,
I look really hard at those.
And I'm not asking you like humiliate the departments.
Oh, no, I
Whatever,
wouldn't.
But like there was some broad overview you could give us periodically. Like here like was several dozen that we rejected in the last 6 month period or whatever. I would like to see that.
Can I just comment that? I think there are some black and white ones like that where they're just rejected. There's no way of coming back. But Ron makes most of the students come up with better justification. So the second and third sole source memo is enough. So I'm not sure how we report. Oh, by the way, it took me 3 times through the mill. I have a special pair of begging shoes that I wear right now.
Yeah, fair enough.
Pete?
Thank you. And just for informational purposes, when I was first on the agenda, on the assembly, we didn't get those, sole source listed separately on our assembly report. We actually passed a resolution that they provide that information at least once a month to us, so that we'd be able to review that. Otherwise, we were having to sort of chase it down one item at a time, and so it's much more easy to track and much more public information available than there used to be on that.
Thank you. Anything else?
Just the last thing is on the consent agenda, this is where you're going to see 9C is where you're going to see the invitation to bids, and 9 Delta is where you're going to see the sole source request, and as it stands right now, the RFP awards. So that's where you'll see those particular documents.
All right.
And then, last thing was any additional questions or comments on that?
Dean?
In terms of next question about the temporal thing, if a contract is subject to assembly approval, not just a reporting requirement, so it's a $600,000 or something, we can't enter into a contract. We can't have a signed contract prior to your approval. And we're supposed to give you in the AM the material terms of the contract. So that's all he's given. So that was Beans. Theoretically, material terms should be in the AM, but we could not have a signed contract.
Can
I ask a
Dean,
follow-up?
can I tag on for a second?
Sure.
And the other thing is, I don't, on Tuesday night, once you approve it, I don't award the contract until 2 days later, because that gives you time for reconsideration. So if you approve a contract on Tuesday, that contract's not going to get awarded till either Thursday or Friday.
I realize we're over, so I'll actually just offline. I mean, I really want to talk a little bit more about what material terms means, because one of the things with Beans, I'll just throw it out there if others want to think about it, is that they purchased bunk beds, but they've also said they don't want to be in the business of sheltering anymore, and so I'm having a lot of heartburn about that. And I did learn through Robin, like half of them probably won't be usable after the term, but it seems to be like, I could see where we could get in a position as the muni of purchasing those bunk beds from them, and we've like paid twice potentially for them. It's just, so I really want to dig into this material terms, but we can do that another time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Did you? No? Okay. Thank you so much.